all. Does this mark a precedent in your view? Does this mark the start of an increasingly involved Pope in diplomatic efforts?
We might see develop in this pontificate of this kind of very imaginative Pope who does want to bring people together, not just in this conflict, in his own conflict within the Christian church and in other conflicts around the world. He's not a political Pope in that sense, but he is certainly very involved politically, and I should say very astute politically. And I think this evening is one example of that. Fionnuala.
And let me ask you, I mean, how must the workings of the Vatican press office have changed since he became Pope? I often wonder this because he is such an active man and he often does things almost unilaterally, deciding to pick up the phone and call Catholics, individual Catholics around the world.
Yeah, he's very difficult to follow for any of us, frankly, and the Vatican press office is no exception to that, because remember, we are used to Pope Benedict, who had a very different style and more or less went by the text. Pope Francis, we've seen in his gestures, in his phone calls, most every time he gives a speech, perhaps with the exception of this evening, he tends to go off script. So not only for the Vatican press office, for the journalists involved, and for security as well, this is a whole new world with Pope Francis. Fionnuala.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Delia. I seem to remember you saying to me a few years ago that this was obviously under a different Pope, but that the Vatican press office had rather, let's just put in America, a journalist trying to pick up the phone to call about a development, that the Vatican office 6 hours later in the day would often be closed. Has that changed at all in recent years, and certainly since the arrival of Pope Francis?
No, that hasn't, Fionnuala. That continues because that is part of Vatican bureaucracy, which is quite a separate thing from the papacy. Although, we should say, in the press office's favor, they have gotten up on Twitter, on email. Certainly, Father Lombardi, who is the Pope's spokesman, is always available on the telephone anytime for all of us. So really, the question of hours at the Vatican is not just a question for the press office. It's all of the Vatican offices that close at 2 o'clock and then on Tuesdays and Saturdays come back for a few hours in the afternoon. But that's a whole separate question. Perhaps Pope Francis will get to that sometime down the line.
Even technology reaches the Vatican press office, though, with the availability after hours. John Allen, standing with Delia there, a final thought, if you may, give us on this wonderful evening as we see this beautiful summer evening draw to a close in the Vatican Gardens as the delegations meet the political and religious leaders of this world.
Well, Fionnuala, we have talked throughout the evening about what an innovative sort of maverick Pope Francis is, a Pope of surprises. I think tonight may be one of the greatest surprises of his papacy to date, and I mean that in this sense. You have a peace summit that I think everyone understands is going to probably have zero impact in the short term on the peace process, and yet is nevertheless historically significant. It's significant because it shows us a revitalization of the Vatican's diplomatic capacity and this very creative spiritual diplomacy that Francis has adopted. It shows us a new model of how followers of different religions can come together, not to pray together, but to pray in the same space according to the